Hi, this is Press TV. I'm Isa Kadhimi with you for the next hour. Coming up, the fallout from the Israeli-US attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran continues. In a joint statement on Monday, the foreign ministers of Britain, Germany and France called on Iran to immediately resume full cooperation with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, a move that has so far been dismissed by Iranian officials. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to end US sanctions against Syria, which the White House said was a move to support the country's path to stability and peace. Meanwhile, the US State Department has revoked the visas for UK rap punk duo Bob Vylan, who led chants against Israel's military on stage at a music festival over the weekend. In the studio, I'm joined by Reza Vadadi. He's a British-Iranian film and documentary director and producer. And joining us down the line from Belfast in the north of Ireland, Fra Hughes, who is a journalist, author and an anti-imperialist activist. Welcome to you both. Firstly, we can begin looking at the fallout from what's been happening in Iran. A funeral was held for one of the Iranian nuclear scientists and others who were killed during an attack by the Zionist regime last week. Mohammad Reza Sadiqi Sabr was killed in his residence in the northern Iranian town of Astana Ashrafia early Tuesday after he'd survived an earlier attack that murdered his 17-year-old son on June the 13th, the first day, of course, of that aggression against Iran. Many people, of course, inside the Islamic Republic have been gathering over the past few days in mourning ceremonies, in funerals for those nuclear scientists, for the civilians, and also, of course, the military leaders who were killed. Reza, if I could begin with yourself. You are, of course, of Iranian descent, and you have family there, and you have your, I guess, ear to the ground, one could say. What is the atmosphere inside Iran at the moment? Because, of course, we've heard lots over the last couple of weeks about how people have rallied around the flag, and how people have united behind the leadership against an aggressive foreign assault against their country. But I want to know, now that the ceasefire has been in place for, a week, pretty much, it's been, tentative, they've been, Israel violated it at the beginning and so on. But what's the atmosphere inside Iran? Is it one of anger at the killing of these people? Like we were saying, a total of 16 people actually died in this attack, including Marta Saber's family. 12 victims of his family were murdered with him. A previous attack killed his son. What's the atmosphere there like? So
from the friends that I've spoken to in Iran, a lot of people are continuing their day-to-day life, as they were doing during the 12-day conflict. And some people were opening their shops, still going to work, maybe less customers, but they try to continue their daily life, which was unlike what was happening in Israel, where people would go to shelters and things were shut down, so forth and so on. So that's one aspect of it. And don't forget, Iran has already experienced 8 years of war in the 80s during Saddam's regime, where they had the imposed war on Iran. So the older generation remember that. That's something they tap into as energy to continue.
Then one thing I wanted to say then is that this younger generation haven't experienced that, but it seems that they are reverting to that, I guess, strong Iranian nationalism that exists, and rallying around the flag, and that the mood in the country is not quite like it was in the 80s, but resembling that kind of war mode, if you will.
So, 3 years ago when there was a Mahsa Amini riots, that it was orchestrated from outside and instigated, all of the effort they put into that has been reversed. Because what people have come to see now is that even if they don't support the Islamic Republic as it is, they may have grievances regarding the economy, if there's corruption, whatever. People have said, this is our country. You've attacked our country. You're killing our people now. So now, as you said, not only have they rallied around the flag, but even more interestingly is you see videos of Iranians, especially young Iranians, women who are not, who don't wear the hijab. You can clearly see that they're not religious, but they're crying and they're saying that we love Sayyid Ali Khamenei, we love Ayatollah Khamenei, we love the leader. And we pray that nothing happens to him. He's like our father figure. So what people have come to realize, even those who were on the fence or maybe angry for whatever reason, and some legitimate reasons of concern regarding economy and so forth, maybe due to sanctions or whatever, they have realized that, no, it's Ayatollah Khamenei and the Sepah who demonize in the West are there people who are keeping us safe from this attack from the US and America?
Fra, if we could come to you there in Belfast. Of course, we've been seeing a lot of criticism for, of course, the Western countries who not just haven't condemned Israel, but have supported them not just in word, but in deed as well. But, of course, the IAEA, the chief of which, Rafael Grossi, was implicated in those documents that Iran seized, Iran's intelligence agencies, which they said these documents showed that Grossi was in coordination with Israel, giving information over to the entity, names of scientists, locations of facilities, and so on. This organization and its leader haven't even condemned the killing of civilians and nuclear scientists. Do you think, going forward, that their credibility has been shot?
I don't believe they ever had any credibility, in my opinion. This is very, very, very reminiscent of the weapons of mass destruction that we were told about in Iraq in 2003. We had the Sexed Up dossier by Dr. David Kelly, who claimed that he was told by someone in the Labour administration at that time to say that Britain was within 30 minutes of a chemical warfare attack from Saddam al-Hussein's regime in Iraq. So what we're witnessing is history repeating itself. We're witnessing the consensus being created, the narrative being created in the public domain to have people frightened to believe that somehow Iran is a nuclear global threat, that somehow if Iran had nuclear weapons, that they would attack not just the Zionist state, but any place all over the world. So they're creating fear, they're creating a consensus for a war on Iran. This isn't about the nuclear option. Iran has said that they are using its nuclear program for peaceful means. That's what France is doing, that's what Britain is doing, that's what Germany used to do. Nuclear power for medical research, for electricity, for powering the economy and powering industry. There is a fatwa which says that the Iranians would never use a nuclear weapon because of the threat to innocent civilian life, because it doesn't target military institutions and it doesn't target military personnel. It is an indiscriminate weapon of mass murder. So what they want to do is they want to destroy Iran. Ever since Mossadegh in 1953 was deposed in the coup that installed the Shah, then that led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. There has been a counter-revolution every day against the will of the people of Iran, who elect the leaders and Ayatollah Khamenei and others who preserve peace and preserve dignity and preserve the sovereignty of the Iranian state. So what they have tried to do from 1979 is what they're continuing to do today, which is to destroy and balkanize, destabilize, and have regime change in Iran, which is not in the interest of the Iranian people. It is in the interest of the expansionist Zionist state. It is in the interest of the capitalists and the imperialists who want the resources of Iran, the wealth of Iran, and the all of society in Iran to be subservient to Western interests, which is that of the EU, that of America, and now the expansionist Zionist state.
Farah, I want to pick up on that because you said there, of course, the plan is to try to, balkanize the Islamic Republic or to balkanize Iran and to overthrow the government. But of course, they can, of course, plan, and we in the Muslim world say they plan and God plans, and God is the best of planner. One thing that we saw during this aggression against Iran is Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly coming out and telling the Iranian people, come out and rise up and overthrow your government, something which was not just roundly ignored, but actually people did the opposite and rallied around the flag. We saw opposition leaders exiled in the West doing the same thing to no avail. And then we've been seeing Israeli TV stations and pundits and analysts basically attacking the Iranian people and saying, oh, why didn't they rise up? We thought that they were going to rise up. Do you think that the Zionists have become a victim of their own propaganda? And what I mean by that is they see hashtags going viral online, and Reza was referring to the Mahsa Amini riots from a few years ago, and they've perhaps convinced themselves that that's an accurate reflection of the reality on the ground. We've possibly, some would argue, seen the opposite. What's your perspective and your take on that?
Well, we talked about destabilizing Iran. We talk about dissent within Iran. Every nation in the world will have people who dissent against the current structures of power in that country. The Labour government and Keir Starmer apparently were elected on less than 20% of the popular vote in Great Britain. You could claim, ironically, that 80% of the people in Britain did not vote for the incumbent party, which is now in power, which is Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. I would suggest, in my opinion, that all the destabilization and dissent in Iran, while some of it is legitimate around the economy, but that's due to the siege and the sanctions, some of it may be against a theological government. I understand that too. But the Iranian government is acting on behalf of the Iranian people, in the interests of the Iranian people, on behalf of the Ummah, the Levant, the axis of resistance, and West Asia in totality. So the people who claim that there is dissent against the government are the people who are financing that dissent. They are the people who are arming the dissenters. They are the people who, from 1980 onwards, have backed the MKO, a terrorist organization which purely exists, I believe, in Albania for the intent to destroy the popular resistance within Iran if given the opportunity. I saw the son of the Shah being feted in Israel as a potential new leader in Iran. So the young generation in Iran and those who are unaware of the history of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 should look at what the Shah did, should look at why he was deposed, and they should look at why he was installed on behalf of British Petroleum and the Anglo-Dutch oil companies in an MI6 created CIA-financed coup in 1952, 1953. In fact, Mossadegh was confined to his home, and when he died, they were so fearful of his legacy that they buried him within the grounds of his own home, refusing him a public funeral. So these people who want to destabilize Iran, they say there is dissent, they say there is opposition, they say there is a majority of the people who are against the current government democratically elected in Iran. I have been to Tehran, I have met Iranians. I understand that Shia Islam is primarily based on the tenet of acting against oppression. And that is why Iran stands with Palestine. That is why Iran stands as a bulwark against the expansionist ideas of the terrorist Israeli state. That's why Iran was bombed. That's why Iran was attacked. It's not about nuclear weapons. It's about the idea they don't want Iran to have a nuclear deterrent because then it will be invincible to further Israeli aggression.
Reza, just to pick up on some of what Fra was outlining there, of course, many have argued this wasn't about the nuclear program. Fra mentioning as well that, of course, countries like the UK and France have their own nuclear power programs. Peaceful nuclear program is what the Iranian government has at the moment. But they've made a joint statement, these foreign ministers of the EU three nations, Britain, Germany and France, saying Iran must immediately resume full cooperation with the IAEA. I mentioned earlier, of course, Rafael Grossi and his role in essentially acting as an agent for the Israeli regime, passing intel to them, making statements in the past few days inciting more war and violence against Iran, saying Iran moved its enriched uranium to heritage sites in Isfahan, a claim with no proof offered whatsoever. Do you think Iran will let the IAEA back in, especially considering that Parliament has now, of course, passed that motion saying that it's not to be the case, that they can never come back, or they can't come back for now?
I just want to take it back a few steps and add on to what my colleague said from Ireland and what you've added, that it's never been about nuclear weapons or nuclear enrichment. Iran stands on a corridor that links the east to the west. It stands between China, Europe, and Africa. And then it stands between the North, the Europeans, Russia, and India and Africa. Whoever controls Iran not only controls the natural minerals of Iran, but decides how powerful the economy of China will proceed forward. Who is the only country in the world right now that is threatened most by China? The United States. And so Israel is never in control of the United States. The United States is in control of Israel as a colony entity and uses it as an attack dog to control these Western Asian countries, specifically trying to always keep Iran down. So the fact that Iran has passed legislation, all of these are the small details to the bigger picture, to the bigger mosaic that is Iran's independence. Being independent will impact the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of global hegemony. Will it be one country followed by the Europeans behind it dictating to the world, again, as it did in the last 60, 70 years after World War II? Or will it be multipolar country system where multiple places of power decide how the world goes forward, decide how trade is done, decide, how progress can continue?
Then let me ask you a question. In the wake of the ceasefire that's been holding for a week, where do we stand? Do you think now Iran is stronger? Can we lead to a multipolar reality?
This is only a gap, a little tea break, as we say, before the bigger war. Israel has to collapse or Iran has to collapse. Both cannot stay because Israel doesn't let go. Israel knows unless it destroys Iran, it cannot continue its existence. Not because Iran, I constantly see the Zionists say, but Iran has threatened to wipe out. No. Has Iran done anything in the last 40 years? Has it fired one missile from Iran to the Israeli borders entity to try to destroy it? No. Has it supported?
Not aggressively.
No. Has it?
Everything is done in self-defense.
So since it got attacked, it defended itself. Yeah. But the only country that has been causing terrorist activities, sabotage, killing scientists, economic warfare, all of these other things, is Israel towards Iran. Israel is the one who's trying to wipe Iran off the map. So this idea is that unless they win, the Israelis win, with the support and the planning of the United States, they're not going to give up.
So you talked there, of course, about a potential multipolar world. And of course, the pole of that new reality could be China. A senior Chinese envoy condemning attacks on civilians in Gaza and urging the international community to demand accountability, saying that seeking food must never mean seeking death. That's Fu Kong, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, at a UN Security Council meeting on West Asia. He lamented the Security Council's failure to take decisive action to end the conflict in Gaza. Let's have a listen.
The Middle East is mired in serious turmoil. Just after Israel and Iran reached a fragile ceasefire, Israel launched an attack on southern Lebanon, resulting in casualties. Meanwhile, the suffering of the Palestinian people continues to intensify in Gaza. The humanitarian catastrophe has long defied description, changing just since the resumption of the Israeli military offensive on March the 8th. So for now, 6,000 people have died and 80% of the territory has been put under emergency evacuation orders as a result of the prolonged and extreme blockade and siege. More than 2 million people are facing severe food shortages. A large-scale famine is looming. In the West Bank, Israel has approved over 9,000 settlements and demolished over 400 Palestinian structures in the past months alone. The operations of the Israeli security forces have resulted in the death of over 40 Palestinians and injured over 1,000. The tragedy of the Palestinian people has shaken international unity and is a test of the human morality and social conscience. The international community must not allow such suffering to continue and must take urgent actions. We strongly urge the full restoration of humanitarian access. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza has been extremely critical in the Secretary General's report, which states that the militarized distribution mechanism promoted by the US and Israel violates the principles of impartiality, independence and neutrality, and is not sufficient to alleviating the humanitarian situation, but rather poses additional dangers to the civilians. The Israeli military opened fire on civilians as they tried to approach distribution points, leading to the death of over 500 people and injured over 4,000. Seeking food must never mean seeking death. China formally opposes the weaponization of humanitarian mission, strongly condemns attacks on civilians, and calls for a serious and full investigation and accountability. Israel must have obligations under humanitarian law, as the occupying power, by immediately lifting its blockade of Gaza and fully restoring humanitarian access and supporting and cooperating with other major organizations financing their work. We strongly call for immediate and lasting ceasefire.
和配合联合国等人道机构开展工作。
Fra, if I could come to you, we've heard there from the Chinese representatives to the United Nations. There have been some voices who have said that as an emerging power, well, superpower, of course, China could be doing more to stop the genocide in Gaza, or at least play a bigger role in the world and in West Asia in particular. What's your take on those voices? Could China be doing more? Are they doing a lot behind the scenes in terms of trying to perhaps counter some of this negative imperialist policy that we've seen from the United States and its allies in support of the Zionist regime?
I think China's in a difficult place. I mean, I know it's seen to be one of the greatest economies in the world. They're already in an economic kind of trade dispute with the Americans. We see the warmongering around Taiwan. We see America using South Korea and Japan and the Philippines and other regional actors in that area to put pressure on to corral China, much like we see the American bases in and around Iran, acting as a form of a military threat and a military barrier to Iran itself. So I'm not sure what else China can do. Should it launch military ships, humanitarian aid to arrive by sea to potentially go into a war with Israel and by extension America and by extension NATO? So it's a difficult position. I think they're trying their best in the background to try and change some of the policies. But it's not just China. If we look at the regional actors within West Asia, I was recently on a global march to Gaza. I arrived in Cairo on the 11th of June. On the 13th of June, we set off for Ismailia en route to Al Arish to go to Rafah on the 15th of June to stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza and to call for an end to the siege and the inhumane blockade and the refusal to allow humanitarian aid, medicine, food, water, fuel, blankets, tents, etc. into Gaza. We were stopped in Ismailia. We were physically detained for 8 hours. Many people were beaten and many were physically removed from a peaceful protest, put on buses and sent back to Cairo. I simply mention this as an example of the Egyptian complicity in the war and in the genocide and on the siege of Gaza. If the Egyptians opened the border and told the Israelis that they were coming through the Philadelphia corridor that the Zionists have occupied illegally in breach of their agreement with Egypt, then it's possible food could be delivered that way. It appears that anyone who tries to bring food or sustenance to the people of Gaza would potentially be in a military conflict with the Israelis. Should people try to break the siege? Yes. Should China try to militarily intervene by simply saying, we are going to Gaza, you're not going to stop us? Should you decide to militarily prevent us, we will militarily defend ourselves? I think there is a strong possibility that they could win that particular action. But while America uses Israel, as quoted by our brother, as the attack dog in West Asia, as the Western, white, Anglo-Saxon, racist, fascist footprint within the Levant, then technically, if you go to war with Israel, you will be at war with America and you will be at war with NATO. So this is like a no-win situation, and the only people losing are the people in Gaza, and the only people winning at this minute in time are those having their barbecues on the beach in Tel Aviv, enjoying the sunshine and laughing at the world's inactivity.
Reza, to come to that, actually, it's a good point, because We saw with the Truthful Promise 3 and the Iranian strikes on Tel Aviv and other parts of the occupied territories that Farah said, you know, the Israelis thus far have had an easy time of it. They've been committing a genocide, going to the beach, and not really facing consequences. This attack, though, against Iran and the consequences it brought is, some say, the first time that they've really had that type of hardship and terror rain down on them, where they were in their bunkers every evening, where they were, of course, taking huge hits militarily to their infrastructure, to their death counts, and so on and so forth. Is that a bit of a game changer as well, in terms of this is something Israel and its population have never gone through before?
So I want to say two things. One is to answer your question, but also to add to what our colleague said from Ireland is China can actually do a lot more. The BRIC countries are India, Brazil, and China are top 3 importers and exporters to Israel. China exports to Israel. So Israel imports from China $20 billion worth of things that it needs. If China doesn't need to get involved militarily, all you can say is no more exports to China.
That's it.
How the hell are you going to replace 19 billion worth of equipment from around the world while you're at war? Impossible. Economy will collapse. More people will be going to Cyprus and buying properties there, or Greece, wherever it is they're going. So China can do more. It just chooses not to. With regards to the impact of bringing the war home after devastating Palestine, Gaza, Lebanon, what they did to Beirut and other parts of Lebanon, the south of Lebanon, what they're doing to Syria right now, and what they tried to do to Iran. Israel is a tiny little country. Some say it's the size of New Jersey. I say it's not even as big as Khuzestan, the province that I'm from. It's a tiny little country. It's very easy for Iran to fire missiles, and these are the blessings of the Iranian engineers who said, we're not going to rely on outside weaponry, we're going to rely on ourselves. It's something that Imam Khomeini would start saying from the beginning. And Ayatollah Khomeini continued. It's when they realize that they can't live like, you know, I'm going to use the word rats, but you don't, you know, in the sewer, constantly in the what do you call it, in the basement. It's going to you can't live like that. And that's why so many have left. So the war has come to them. They realize they can't defend against it. They have only limited amount of defense. You know, it's a small country. And so the tide has turned, and that's why they pushed for the, I don't call it ceasefire, but the ceasing of fighting, hostilities.
For now, the temporary, as many would say, ceasefire. Although on that point as well, in terms of how the Zionist entity was being struck and hit, there are some who've argued that, of course, Iran could have and should have done more in terms of hitting the infrastructure of the country. I think I read a stat that there were only 8 water salination plants in the entity, a few electricity grids. They did, of course, hit the Haifa port, which is still burning according to some satellite imagery. So I think if there is to be another round of this, we could see a step up of the escalation ladder, which many argue should have already happened, and seeing life actually being made unbearable for those living in a country which, as you said, is not bigger than Khuzestan. We're going to carry on this conversation after this very short break. Welcome back to Press TV. Now, the US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to end US sanctions against Syria, which the White House said was a move to support the country's path to stability and peace. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced the move ahead of Donald Trump signing the executive order.
This afternoon, the president will be signing an executive order to terminate the United States sanctions program on Syria. And this is in an effort to promote and support the country's path to stability and peace. The order will remove sanctions on Syria while maintaining sanctions on the former President Assad, his associates, human rights abusers, drug traffickers, persons linked to chemical weapons activities, ISIS and their affiliates, and Iranian proxies. And this is, again, an action that the president promised and shocked the world with in Saudi Arabia, because he's committed to supporting a Syria that is stable, unified, and at peace with itself and its neighbors. The president met with Syria's new president when we were in the Middle East, as you know, and so this is another promise made and promise kept by this president to promote peace and stability in the region.
Fra, I want to come back to you. Of course, we're seeing the lifting of sanctions against the nation of Syria, which of course were put in place with that Caesar Act to do what is essentially materialize, to crush the Syrian state, to bring it to such a state of poverty that overthrowing it would be a relatively easy task to do. And we saw that with the mass poverty, the ability to buy off Syrian officials and generals and others who essentially abandoned the fight against HTS and the other terrorist groups who are now in control of Syria. What do you think the lifting of these sanctions represents in terms of Syria's new role in the region? There are many who have talked about, for example, Syria very shortly concluding a negotiation and a normalization agreement with the Zionist regime.
Well, I say the lifting of the Caesar sanctions is job done. That's what it signifies to me. It was there in order to crush the economy. It was there in order to sow dissent among the Syrian people. I was lucky enough to meet President Assad in Damascus in 2015 as part of an international delegation. He told us that in 2011, he was asked or told to normalize relations with Israel. He refused, and he was told that there would be consequences, and the consequences were the war that was unleashed upon Syria. Now, if you look at some of the actors involved, you had Turkey, you had the United Arab Emirates, you had Saudi Arabia, you had Takfiri fundamentalists from all over the globe. 80% of these people who are in the Syrian Defense Force or some affiliate or Al-Nusra Front, not Syrian nationals, paid mercenaries who went there to destroy the Syrian state. The removal of the Caesar sanctions is not an endorsement of Syrian democracy. There is no Syrian democracy. There is the murder and slaughter of the Alawites. There is the bombing of Christians in the churches. The war cry from HTS was Christians to Beirut and Alawites to their graves. What we're witnessing is the imperialist exploitation of the resources of the Syrian people. You now have the IMF and the World Bank, and there will be American corporations. There will be corporations from the EU who want to go in. There will be no more free healthcare. There will be no more free education. There will be no more free social housing. You will have a free-for-all within the Syrian economy of international companies and conglomerates who wish to steal the resources of the Syrian people, and people will be charged for healthcare, they will be charged for education, they will be charged for social housing, they will be taxed, and all the profit that can be extracted from Syria will go to the West, the same way Western imperialism has impoverished the global South for 400 years. The wealth and the aggrandizement that we see in the West was built on the impoverishment, the slavery, and the exploitation of the people under military, imperialist occupation, colonization, and control. That is simply what we're going to see in Syria, a new free-for-all to see who can steal what and how quickly they can do that in the former, sadly now defunct, Syrian Arab Republic.
Reza, picking up on those points that Farah made, and he covered a lot of ground, it's really telling his experiences with meeting the former former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, that he said that in 2011 he was given that offer to normalize, and when he refused, we saw, of course, that war waged on him, that proxy war, using those terrorist Takfiri forces from across the world. Now, we're at this point where Jolani is in charge of Syria. There's a lot of talk that in the coming weeks and months that he will be joining the Abrahamic Accords. What do you make of that? Do you think that we are now at the cusp of that happening, and other countries in the region, there's been talk of Saudi and Lebanon as well, also joining that accord, which would essentially legitimize and normalize the existence of the Zionist regime amongst the, some within West Asia?
I spoke to an author called John Perkins. He wrote The Economic Hitman. And he explained how in the 70s and 80s he would go around on behalf of the CIA as a mercenary hired by a consultant company, and he would speak to ministers and officials in countries to say either you agree on terms of giving your resources to us, or we have to call in the wolves. So what Israel did, what America did, what Europe did, what NATO did was call in the wolves once when President Assad decided not to agree what terms they wanted. And this is something they tried to do with Iran. They've done it with other countries in the region. However, from my understanding is Lebanon has Hezbollah inside it. Now, whatever you want to ascribe to it, if you, British establishment calling it terrorist group or not, they have a very strong presence in Lebanon. And for any government there to try to normalize with Israel after what Israel has done to Lebanon, not since just recently, but the 80s when they came and killed and raped and so forth and so on, a lot of Lebanese are not going to stand for that. So I don't think Lebanon will be part of any Abrahamic cause anytime soon. Saudi Arabia, possibly. They've talked about having, unless there's a Palestinian state, we can't sign on to it. But you can't really trust them because one minute they say something, next minute whatever. But definitely I believe that, Jolani or whatever his name is, he will definitely sign up because that's why he was brought in. He was hired for the job of normalizing Syria with Israel and giving away the Golan Heights. But don't forget, the Syrian people don't want it. He may have been appointed himself as the president or as the leader, but once he's removed, because eventually the Western powers will remove him, once he's removed, someone else comes into power that may be more populist, you never know, that accord could be reversed. It's not something permanent, right? So they're trying their best to normalize, but the people of the region have seen the true face, and even the world, arguably say the whole world has seen the true face of Zionist colony, and no one wants to normalize with them.
Well, I think one thing we've seen as well, interestingly, is inside Iran, people have united around the flag. But in the region as well, an interesting kind of development where people who are hostile to Iran, whether for sectarian reasons, whether for racist reasons, for whatever reasons. I was speaking to some Syrian gentlemen the other day, and they were telling me that they were very anti-Bashar al-Assad, and they were very much against Iran's support of Bashar al-Assad. And I pointed out the reasons why that would have been the case, everything we're seeing now with Jolani. And they said that they were, and they never expected to be, cheering on Iran actively, and that they were questioning themselves and perhaps questioning whether they were on the right side of history with regards to Syria. So, like you said, I think there is a shift going on the ground. But I always go back to, I think the most important shift is the one that we've seen inside Iran, where people who are anti or pro, most people are rallying around the flag. And I think that's what's key, because Israel's successes in assassinating people in the recent aggression was possible because of fifth columns inside the country. Now we're seeing crackdowns. Now we're seeing members of the public calling up and saying there's something suspicious here, there's something suspicious there. Do you think in the long run, this assault, this aggression against Iran strengthens it in sense of the country will be more united? Those players in the region now who doubted Iran and its capabilities will see that they can hit Israel at will, they can do whatever they want to us, and that's changing some calculations going forward.
So Iran predominantly a Shia country. And right now we're in the month of Muharram, which is the first month of the Arabic calendar, which is the month where Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Holy Prophet, was martyred by Muslims and the Muslim leadership. The grandson of the Prophet who brought Islam was martyred by the Muslims and Muslim leadership. And that blood of Imam Hussein nurtured Islam, held Islam without it falling apart, becoming a religion that is unknown. The same thing Iranians believe for Iran. The martyrs, be they commanders in the army, be they children, be they scientists, the blood of these martyrs will nurture the strength of Iran. And that's something that unfortunately the West doesn't understand, because it only sees things in a worldly, materialistic view.
It has no comparable thing to hold on to. I remember seeing a funny quote when I think it was an Iranian analyst said that the reason the West doesn't understand how people have love for, it was when Haj Qasim Soleimani was murdered and martyred, how people don't understand that is because in the West your idols are SpongeBob SquarePants. So it was a funny reference, but it was essentially saying that there is a lack of understanding of the Iranian mentality. Fra, I do want to come back to you quickly, though. I want to throw to another development coming out of Washington, D.C. and the U.S. State Department, which has revoked the visas for the UK rap punk duo Bob Vylan, who were set to go on tour in the United States later this year. Bob Vylan drew intense praise and criticism after they led crowds of music fans in chanting "Free, Free Palestine" and "Death, Death to the IDF," the so-called Israeli Defense Forces, during a televised performance at the Glastonbury Festival. British police have also launched a criminal investigation into the incident. US State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce telling reporters that every sovereign nation has a right to decide who's going to come to this country. We can hear more.
Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country. Now, we've stated that when it comes to how we vet people, if they are going to be coming here to be helpful, to be nice people, to be great tourists, or if they're coming for other reasons, that every sovereign nation has a right to decide who's going to come to this country. So we've been public about that standard. And this was a very public event that violated, as you've seen from the Deputy Secretary's tweet, that very basic standard about the nature of who we want to let into the country. That's all right. It is important the American people support us taking care about who comes here. And I think his tweet and the Secretary's language and his approach on the policy speaks for itself. We recognize that Israel is doing the appropriate thing with investigating certain allegations, and we certainly, like everyone else, will be watching that. And at the same time, we also know that there are people on the ground who want to disrupt and disturb the success of this because of the nature of this industrial complex that has allowed this to go on for decades. So we are working to get aid in, at the same time still working for that ceasefire, still hoping to make the difference for Gaza. And of course, I think our action and the issues with Iran speak to our commitment to changing the Middle East so people can live in peace.
Fra, I want to come to you and look at this dichotomy because, of course, you've got the US government on the one hand normalizing a regime in Syria which is led by literally a man who was a deputy to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Al-Qaeda in Iraq and to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as his deputy for ISIS in Syria. He's okay, he can be normalized. We'll lift sanctions on him, we'll probably invite him to the White House at some point. But a rap punk group singing a chant against the most murderous army in the world today, which many people view as a terrorist group, that's beyond the pale. What do you make of those decisions there by the US government?
Well, it reminds me of 1984 and the Ministry of Truth. What we're witnessing is a continued crackdown by the mainstream propagandists. We mentioned earlier about how propaganda and the mainstream media is used to create a narrative and a consensus within the public body for the acceptance of governmental internal and external domestic and foreign policy. With the advent of social media, I look at social media and the internet very much in a parallel to the printing press. So before the printing press came into existence, the churches had control over the narrative that became the public discourse. Once we had the printed media, people could find out information eventually from all over the globe. And that's what the internet does today. The internet is showing us what is happening in real time, in truth, in reality. We are witnessing the genocidal ethnic cleansing of the people of Palestine and in the greater area of the Levant with the prosecution of the greater Israeli project. If I was to paraphrase Malcolm X, I would simply say, if you're not careful, the media would have you believing that the oppressors are the victims and that the victims are the oppressors. So I would encourage people to use critical thinking, to watch as much alternative media, social media as possible, not to watch mainstream media, BBC, CNN, ABC, but to find places like Press TV. Al Jazeera is very good on Palestine. They're very poor on nearly everything else. It's the same with the RT. RT has its own particular slant. There are alternatives to the lies that we are being told every day. And Bob Villan came out with a statement, and as part of that statement, he said, genocide is the story, Gaza is the story, Palestine is the story, the actions of the resistance is the story. To focus on them is a distraction, and it is to encourage, so I'm paraphrasing what he said, but to use anyone who stands up against Zionism as an anti-Semite, as someone who hates Jews, as someone who is a danger to freedom and democracy throughout the world. The only real danger to freedom and democracy that I see in the world is Israel, it's NATO, and it's the United States of America.
Reza, you are somebody who is, of course, in the media. You're a filmmaker, you're a documentary producer. If you're Bob Villan, this has been a gift, because I was monitoring a little bit their social media. In the morning, they had about 160,000 followers. By the late afternoon, they had 250,000 followers on Instagram. The mainstream media, and Fra made some excellent points there about the media and even some alternative media, but the mainstream media, they've never been less relevant, have they? Because they're speaking and acting as attack dogs on behalf of the Israeli regime against groups like Kneecap, against the duo Bob Villan, but they're only causing more and more support for them and more attention for them. Is that because they fundamentally misunderstand the context and the landscape that they now exist in as the mainstream media?
100%. There's a concept called media resistance. And this concept is by an American academic in the 1980s, where he discusses that alternative media, at that time there was no internet, but now we have internet. Alternative media is a form of resistance, and by gathering audiences, which unfortunately the mainstream legacy media is doing, because they're directing people to go where? To the very people that are against them, right? And so this attack that they constantly perpetrate against Bob Villan or anyone who they're against is encouraging those who watch them but are critical of them to direct them to their opposition. Yeah. And so this media resistance that has kind of snowballed since October 11 has galvanized people to realize that I don't need to watch BBC to get the news anymore. I can go on. There's loads of podcasts. There's loads of news channels, independent, and they've mushroomed independently, and many of them have many followers. Why? Because people are thirsty for the truth. The truth you're not going to get from legacy media. And if you have, as my colleague said, a little bit of critical thinking, you've come on board that everything that the Foreign Office says, the mainstream media is repeating. And so they look for alternative to find the truth.
Yeah, and I think that it is the law of unintended consequences. It is having a counterproductive effect. But also you mentioned, for example, alternative voices. I want to come back to what was happening when the aggression against Iran began. I'm of the opinion that the Israeli, and I've heard some Israeli analysts allude to this as well, that they thought that aggression against Iran would wrap up in 72 hours and that in a few days the government in Iran would collapse, the people would rise up, we've hit their nuclear facilities and their military leaders and so on and so forth. And it didn't materialize. Then there was a push to get America involved directly. But one thing we saw interestingly in the media, and I want you to maybe pick up on this, is we saw voices on the right of American politics, and not just Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who have long been critical of Zionism. People who describe themselves as friends of Israel, people like Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Megyn Kelly, there were a few others as well, Matt Gaetz, the former congressman. These are people who are firmly in the MAGA camp, who themselves came out and said, firstly, we don't want to be involved in this, this is Israel's war, but also humanizing the people of West Asia, humanizing the people of Palestine and Iran, something which is quite odd coming from that camp. Do you think we're seeing a paradigm shift where even unusual, let's say, not allies, but unusual quarters of the media landscape are now also pushing back?
There's no matter how much we say this and people don't realize, we live in a world where there's the unseen. For 2 years, what Israel has done to Palestine has softened the hearts of people that didn't even know that hearts need to be softened. And so this 2 years of suffering of the Palestinians has softened the world's heart, even these people who follow MAGA, even these people who support Trump, but now said, look, we voted for you because we didn't want war, have come to the point is like, look, unless we come out of this paradigm of saying they're brown, they're Muslim, they're Arab, they're Iranian, they're our enemy, and talk in a more nuanced way, the same perpetual thing is going to continue where Democrats come in, there's war, Republicans come in, there's war. And so I think over the last 2 years of all the stuff that's happening around the world, people have changed, and people don't want war anymore. People want peace. And as Muslims, we believe a savior will come called Imam Mahdi. And it's possible that the world is changing towards a direction where the world's heart softens for a savior.
On that note as well, you know, we're seeing things or perspectives changing around the world. Of course, you are somebody who is a firm and long-standing anti-imperialist. There are some who may be a bit more skeptical and say it's all good, the public opinion changing, and it has firmly, as Reza was saying, left and right. There's been a massive erosion of support for not just the Zionist regime, but of course Western intervention and Western war crimes against the people of the global South. But is it going to make a difference? Or, long term, could we see this shift at a policy level or at some type of institutional level? And if not, what needs to happen for that to materialize?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I'll give my kind of stock answer when people maybe say things like this to me. The reality is, in most of the states, if the power at this moment in time, before we have a multipolar new world order, before BRICS comes into the economic ascendancy, if we stick with the imperialist domination of the West, of the EU, America, Canada, Australia, and others, while you have the people in power, so you have Labour, Conservative, Democrat, and Republicans, you have this two-system state where you vote in one party and then after they ruin the economy or ruin your life or ruin your future, you then vote for the other one. So it's a Tweedledee, Tweedledum kind of political system. You could take a piece of paper and slip it between the policies of the Democrats and the Republicans, the Conservatives and the Labour, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in Ireland. The political parties are part of the established deep state order and have been for 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, 150 years, so long as those parties have been in existence. So we must separate the people power, who have the choice to decide who represents them at the ballot box, and the people who actually go forward for that representation. How many independents do you have in the House of Parliament? How many do we have in Ireland? How many do we have in America? How many do we have in Germany? So the reality is, while the state almost sponsored political parties are in place and people do not have a real alternative, then who do they vote for? It is my opinion that politicians in opposition lie to the populace. They say we will increase housing, we will increase money for social welfare, for health, for education. They get into power and they do exactly the opposite. So there is a huge burgeoning global movement of people who I believe are mainly under 40. So the mainstream media has still captured people over 50 who watch the 6 o'clock news, who watch the 10 o'clock news, because that is the only time they have to catch up on current world affairs. Whereas anyone under 40 is on the internet, is on their mobile phone, is on their laptop, or on their tablets. They're following things throughout the course of the day. So people can rise up against the continuing war of terror that has been going on for over 2 decades. But unless that is represented by political power, and I genuinely don't know where that's going to come from. When will people stop voting for the Conservatives and the Labour Party? When will they stop voting Democrat and Republican? They will have to begin to vote for independents or parties that are not invested in the state. And in conclusion, I would say that people who are in opposition, who stand for power today, say, vote for me, we will get those people out of power. Then in 20 years' time, they are part of the system and they become the very people that they stood outside of Parliament 20 years ago calling for them to be thrown out of power. I believe the real future is in BRICS, it's in the multipolar world order, and it's the end of Western hegemony, so that these imperialist warmongers are marginalized. I don't think the people in Europe or America will have the power to do that. I don't think they will have the political representation. I think it will be the global south, it will be West Asia, it will be Africa and the Levant that bring peace to the world at the expense of marginalizing these imperialist capitalist warmongers.
Farah, thank you so much. Some excellent points there, of course, echoing much of what many have said in the past, a view that I share, which is that these systems are fundamentally unreformable. And of course, an alternative reality needs to be created outside, as you mentioned, the Global South and BRICS. Remains to be seen whether we will ever see that materialize, but the long arc seems to be pointing in that direction. Farah Hughes, thank you for joining us from Belfast there in Northern Ireland, and here in the studio, Reza Vidadi as well. Thank you so much for joining us. That's all we have time for in this segment today, but we'll be now going back to our colleagues in Tehran. Thank you.